which shows former police officer Daniel Starks placing a device on the man's neck and then him falling to the ground. Meridian Mayor Percy Bland says the city will not condone actions of this kind.
Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity. We talk about PC culture, pop culture, politics, and anything else that comes up. Joining me as always is Kale.
Hello.
Brandon.
Hello, my people.
And Jim.
Hello, everybody.
Today we're going to get into one of our traditionally very controversial topics, which is, of course, policing in America. And we all agree on everything, so shouldn't have any problems at all. But before we talk about systemic corruption and police abuse, let's talk about drinks. Kale, what are you having?
Well, I'm making some healthier choices in my life, and for the last couple of weeks, I've been on a diet. I have been alcohol-free, so I'm having a cranberry and ginger ale.
That is a giant cranberry.
Looks good.
It's quite refreshing.
Is it good?
It's sparkling and fun.
Good for bladder infections.
I've come to discover I really like ginger beer, by the way. That's pretty good.
Yeah, ginger in and of itself is a good thing. It's got a nice spice to it.
Yeah.
Brandon, what are you having?
I am having a McGuire's Draft Stout beer.
That disappears
into the
magically.
background there. Oh, and I opened it with my Mordock opener.
Modoc.
Yeah.
Jim.
I'm having some wine tonight. A cheap bottle of whatever the store brand is at Fresh Time. La Prensa. It's Cabernet.
And the time, of course, spelled Thyme.
Yes.
Very important. When I talk cops, I get spicy, and there's nothing better than a nice spicy rye, in this case. Wild Turkey Rare Breed Rye, which is very good. So this is a topic that we've talked about doing a show on basically since this, channel got started. There's been a lot of stuff coming out recently that has sort of pushed me into becoming more, I guess the term would be enraged about a lot of this stuff. And so I thought we would talk about it. So starting off, I think in order to organize this in a way that sort of makes sense somehow, we're going to kind of start off at more like a local level. So this is local policing and problems with local policing, and then kind of work our way up to the more systemic problems. But I think I want to go around, just kind of get everybody's initial thoughts first. Like when you think about cops, when you think about police, what's kind of the first thing that comes to your mind? Kale, why don't you start us off?
I think authority figure. I instantly become nervous, which isn't the reaction I think that they're supposed to give or cause. And I do have some personal experience with law enforcement that we can talk about. We've been like you said, talking about this for a very long time. I think that we've all put in a due process of information for this episode, preparing. So that's all I got to say about that right now.
All right, Brandon.
It's one of those things that I've probably said it on the show before. I started off very conservative in my younger years and probably supported the police as much as any right wing does now. And obviously being a white male, I haven't had a whole lot of personal issues. But as I've become more left wing, and I've started to realize that all working class people, regardless of race or gender, whatever, are my brothers and sisters and my fellow working class people, and that every type of bigotry and harassment affects me in some way. I have definitely become less and less police friendly. Like, I don't afford them fairness, my benefit of the doubt. That's, a lot of people will say, well, there's still good cops out there. There's probably still good individuals. but you're talking about a group of people, at least in this country, in the US, that started off as runaway slave catchers. I don't know that you can transform that into a good thing.
So Jim, what are your initial thoughts?
So I feel like I have a lot of anxiety when it comes to policing. And I know there are good cops out there, but I feel like you just don't know what you're going to get. And I feel like there's a large part of the police force that are really in it for the right reason. And there's another large part of it, of the police force, that's in it for absolutely the wrong reasons. And these people shouldn't be policing. And my other main thought in this regard is that the police do a terrible job of self-policing. So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been radicalized on this issue. Down below, I link to the channel Audit the Audit, which is a channel. Basically, there's a new thing, and this is kind of one thing that got me into this topic, called auditors. And basically, they go around and I don't know, for lack of a better word, bait police into coming out and talking to them, usually by photographing public buildings, government buildings, factories, things like that. And to basically gauge the police response, and the police often have a very, very bad response. And Audit the Audit, he sort of goes through each of their videos and sort of breaks down whether or not they were in the right or the wrong. I think he's relatively even-handed. But police are doing things all the time that are well outside the bounds of what they should be doing. And so I think maybe, since we're starting to talk about on a local level, some of the things that I see are, going beyond. I mean, the whole purpose of police, or should the supposed purpose of policing, is to maintain a safe environment. And so you would think, and I don't know, Brandon and Cale definitely would talk about this growing up in smaller towns, where we could see at least some side of that good side of policing, where they would come up and ensure that everybody is safe. And once they've ensured everybody's safe, then that's it. Whereas now there has to be this command presence. And if I've asked you for your name or your ID, whether or not you're actually required to give that, you're going to give that, or I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to find a reason to arrest you.
Yeah, what was on the one video we were watching, whereas the guy was describing his experience and it was a video where called the 10 rules for dealing with police, and it's one of those reenactment things, like the guy tells his story and it goes to a clip of how his interaction with the cop happened. And it's like, I was always, my entire life, I've had a problem with authority. I can't stand being told what to do, and I don't know where people think they get their authority, but I know where cops get it. They have more guns and more jail cells than I do. If we had equal amount, then there would be less problem. But I mean, there's times where he's like, the guy was saying right at the beginning, oh, this is the 4th time I've been pulled over in a few months. And their advice to him is to just be calm and be polite, which is probably good advice, but man, I can really see the problem. I can see how you would just be like, man, I am an American citizen. Even if I wasn't, I don't deserve this. I don't care what you think. I don't care whether or not you think I've respected you. There's no law saying I have to respect you. Maybe there is now, but there shouldn't be. I mean, it's just, it drives me nuts. And it's one of those things where, man, my privilege really comes in handy for me, because I would have a hard time keeping my mouth shut a lot of times. I'm not a confrontational person, but something would slip out if it was like 4th time and I'm supposed to keep showing this deference and politeness. It would be really hard. I can see where people who get in trouble, man, I can see their point. I can see the problem.
I would say I'm a non-controversial or a non-confrontational person too, but Brandon and Kayla are here and they've known me for longer than 8 minutes. So I don't think that would probably hold up in this particular situation. Kayla, what about you?
Well, I kind of broke this all down into 3 categories: questionable, bad, and good. And like you guys were saying about the video about 10 rules for dealing with a police. One of the things he was talking about was simply showing your ID. And I actually have a personal example of that where I was in the vicinity of someone who was having an argument in public with another someone, and the police came. And even though I had nothing to do with the argument, they wanted to see my ID. Now, my initial instinct was to be like, you don't need my ID. I'm not doing anything. I'm just standing here. But then I knew that that would lead to further confrontation. So I just gave him my ID. But I knew why he wanted my ID, so he could run it for wants and warrants, even though I'm just standing there not doing anything. And I don't have any wants or warrants because I tend to try to stay out of trouble.
That's part of the problem though. They can't just can't run everybody they see for warrants every time they go to anybody.
Yeah, he's just like, give me your ID or else I would, if I went on to refuse, according to the information that I've heard, that it could lead to a charge of resisting arrest, getting arrested for that. Just
there's something uniquely American about arresting people for resisting arrest and having no underlying charge whatsoever.
So yeah, that one kind of stood out to me a little bit. And like any defense attorney would probably tell you is shut up. Just shut up.
We might talk about some of those defense attorneys here in just a minute. Yeah, I think that unless a police officer either suspects that there's a crime being committed or about to be committed, has probable cause of that, they cannot ask or they cannot demand your ID. That's just something they can't do. Jim, I feel like as the person who might have a little more professional experience in this, maybe we should go to you on this. Like, as far as, when you're talking to a police officer, what do they have the right? What do they have the right to ask for?
So you're actually talking to the wrong person. I don't deal with that stuff. I took a law and criminal a course in criminal law, but a long time ago.
By the way, it goes to show you one thing that some people don't understand is that lawyers have all types of I almost said specialities. I don't know what's wrong with me.
That's fine.
All sorts of specialties. And that's why you don't want a copyright attorney defending you in court. But if you have a copyright issue, you should go to a copyright lawyer or a personal injury lawyer or an estate lawyer. There's all different kinds of law, and law in this country is incredibly important.
So I will just add this while we're talking about my profession. Just so you know, I'm licensed to practice law in Iowa, which means I could represent you in criminal court. I could handle your taxes. I could handle your divorce. And I know less than nothing about any of those things, which for me was really eye-opening experience. And it has made me really, really, really not trust any professional that I deal with. I mean, some professionals are great, but you can't just assume that just because somebody has a degree that they know what the hell they're doing.
Real quick, would you need to say that that kind of the lawyer thing of nothing that I say is meant to be construed as legal advice?
Yes,
right.
Definitely.
So here's my problem with the cops don't have a right to do that is, so what? Who's enforcing it? If there's a cop that decides they're going to do something that they're not allowed to do, who's stopping them? Who's punishing them? Who's enforcing it? Who's getting that cop off the force? that kind of goes back to the first thing I said, which is there's terrible policing of the police by themselves. And the Supreme Court has essentially over the last 50 years kind of guaranteed that there's no accountability. I mean, sure, police departments get sued and people get paid damages, but it's not the cops, the individual cops that pay it. They don't get fired.
Yeah,
And
they
if they
very
do,
rarely get fired for even the worst offenses.
and if they do, they move over to the next county, the next state. Like, so when I hear advice about what the police can and can't do, I think it's good to be educated on it, but to a certain extent, it doesn't matter. Because if you run into a cop that does the job right and follows the rules, you probably don't need to know all that stuff. And on the other hand, if you run into a cop that does it all wrong, it doesn't matter what you know. Because like Cale was saying, they'll find a pretense. Like, oh, well, you're not cooperating with me, you're resisting. How would you prove that you weren't resisting?
I have so many points because you said something that basically ramped right into something that I wanted to talk about. So my wife, every so often, she works has worked in nonprofits for many years. and so they have done trainings on like know your rights. And the one thing I want to tell her, and it's good training, it really is good training to teach people this is what you have to do when a cop stops you, this is what you have to give and all this stuff. But what you're saying is unfortunately absolutely true, that there are some cops that don't give a shit what your rights are. There was one video I saw, and again, this is on Audit the Audit. I didn't link all the videos that I watched from his channel because I watched a million of them, and it gave me rage-induced anxiety over and over again, so I kind of had to stop watching it. There is a federal ATF agent. So a federal ATF agent's part of their job, which is probably not, I would think one of the better parts of their job, is due to the really, really shitty way in which we have gun laws in this country. If somebody submits a request to buy a gun, they basically have, I think is it 5 days or 10 days or whatever it is to do the background investigation. If the background investigation is not finished in the end of that period, whatever it is, they just have to sell the gun. Well, if the background investigation comes up badly, let's say 12 days or 15 days or 16 days down, then the ATF is empowered to go and collect the firearm, which I know what you're thinking. How do I get that job? So the ATF agent is knocking on the door of this person who is not authorized to have a firearm. They, have committed a felony or whatever the case is that for them to not have a gun. And police officers come up. The ATF agent identifies himself as a federal agent. The police officer then pulls out his gun and starts screaming at him. His partner comes up, pulls out his gun. They start screaming at him. The agent identifies himself again as a federal agent and tells him he's going to get his identification as a federal agent. And the officer then threatens to shoot him if he reaches for his pocket. And so there again, in any normal protocols, the guy would say, I am a federal agent. The police officer would then say, let me see your identification as a federal agent. The federal agent would then show him his identification. So again, what you're saying is absolutely true, that knowing all these rights is incredibly important. We'll talk a little more about those rights. We've linked to a bunch of places that are better than us to tell you about what those rights are. But there are a bunch of people, and this is what I told my wife, that these people knowing their rights is good, but there's some people that just don't give a shit. They'll just break the law. They'll just do it anyway. And I think that is, to me, the most frustrating thing about all that.
That's similar to the video that it's linked down below as well from Cop Busters, where a former narcotics officer was basically he made a video series where he would go and find cops who were just cutting corners and pulling dirty little tricks to get like search warrants and stuff like that illegally. And in one example, it showed an illegal house raid where he had just had the house set up because he knew they were going to come raid it. and all he had in there was a couple of little baby pine trees, but he made it look like a grow house or whatever, because he knew they would come running. And of course they did, and of course they did it in a dirty way. And then of course they didn't want to talk about it when he brought cameras out.
And by the way, Jim, that's the answer to your main question. How do we know? And that is filming. Filming police officers is absolutely vital. There was a former police officer from Baltimore, and Baltimore, oh boy, that's a city we could do full episodes on. Who basically, he was on one of the, he kind of did the media circuit after he stopped being a police officer, and was sort of a whistleblower on how bad the police force is in Baltimore, which it is. It's terrible, or at least it always has been. Maybe it's fine now, but I'm guessing not. And basically said, Black people have been telling you for 50 years that cops are not policing in an even-handed, fair way. They are over policing certain neighborhoods. Did you just think they have been lying for the last 50 years? And to me, especially as Brennan said, I was a conservative like him growing up. And I think we did. I think there was a large part of us that said, yeah, they're making too much out of it. And it's like, but these reports are going on all the time. But now with filming, we can see this stuff. I mean, there was the case, whenever this comes out, it won't have just happened, but it just happened as we're sitting here, of the teenager in, I think it was San Antonio, where a police officer saw a car, and his reason for going up, as he said, he thought the car looked like a car that had evaded him the night before. So instead of knocking on the window or anything, which is what protocol would be, he simply opened the door and went in kind of an aggressive manner. The kid who was driving the car, not without reason, decided to pull out and get away. The police officer immediately pulled out his service revolver and started firing into the car. The kid is now in critical condition. He may die, he may not die. Now, in that case, they did fire the police officer, but it's just that is this tendency. They have these guns and they shoot. And it is sort of the whole reason that got me into this. They're just shooting all the time.
There have been so many police shootings, and a lot of times the rates, if you look at the rates, it's also affected by race. People of color are shot far more often than people who aren't. There was an article that's linked down below that talked about something called the outcome test, and then there was another one called the threshold test, basically showing graphically in graphs the disparaging numbers when it comes to race in law enforcement, and including especially drug charges. And they talked about how legalization of marijuana could greatly affect a lot of those arrests.
Well, and
I think that's
was
important.
also wondering,
Brandon, real quickly, we are probably going to talk a little bit about marijuana usage and a few other things. I don't want to get too much into the drug war, because I think that is a huge topic in and of itself. But I think we'll have to talk about it a little bit. Go ahead, Brandon. I apologize.
well, I was wondering too, when I was watching some of the videos, and they were saying that the police don't have to tell you the truth, that they can lie to you. And they can use these lies to get your consent to like a search or something. And it made me wonder, is there some sort of reform we could do to where consent given in a power imbalance is invalid? Because it's such a power, like you were talking about police that don't even care about their rights. Well, of course, that's not going to stop them anyway. But to not only go through any kind of humiliation or beating or being shot at or whatever, but then to also have it be said, oh, well, you consented to whatever. In such a power imbalance, it should, like there's a presumption of innocence. There should just be a presumption of you can't. Like you just always have to have a warrant or something. It just, I don't know, just something along that lines that means that you can't use your power to get this thing that if I were fully informed or on an equal playing field, I wouldn't give.
Yeah, so one of the things teeing off of that really bothers me is the vagueness of policing. So the police can ask you to do things voluntarily, and they can give you a lawful order. And I feel like when I watch videos of police interacting with people, I often see that there's no clear communication of what those two things are. If a cop says, I need to see inside your car, is that a lawful order, or is that a request that you have the right to turn down?
I'd like to follow that up by saying, can I see inside of your disciplinary file?
Okay, smart ass.
Well, you're well
I
within.
would say do what it takes to survive the encounter. Maybe don't.
Right. But
You can ask questions. They don't, it's not like
Don't
they,
ask questions.
No,
Maybe
don't ask questions.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would say, the most important thing, and we will get into shut the fuck up Fridays, which is very, very important. But what Jim is saying is true. And what I said was true as far as there are police out there that don't care. But also there is a tremendous increase in body cams, which is just is such an incredible boon for freedom and justice. Get it on record. Get on record that you are saying, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to not answer questions without an attorney present. And maybe it won't matter. It is possible that if you have just a completely corrupt cop, because they are certainly out there and they are certainly a lot more of them than you think. But get it on the record. So if he's got a body cam, it's got your voice on there saying, I do not consent to a search, and I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to not answer questions without an attorney present.
Well, also, what would you guys think? Like, if a body cam is turned off, or like the hood is flipped up on a dash cam or something, wouldn't that just be an auto fire? Like, you just can't be a part of the police force anymore?
I mean, you'd think so.
there should be some repercussions for that.
You just shouldn't be a cop anymore. If you can't follow the simple law of just keeping your camera on, I can't trust you to follow anything else. You should just be fired. We don't need you.
But
Well,
We
the
don't
one
need
thing
more
that
cops
takes-
anyway.
The
Like
one
Mike-
thing go ahead, Kale. Sorry.
like Mike and Jim were just talking about, the whole step that even leads up to this is probable cause. And that leads, to like, okay, like what's your reason for stopping me? If you're in your car, if you're walking down the street, I mean, I guess I would ask why you stopping me, or I'd ask if I'm being detained.
Kale, that is a great time to bring up our friends at Pot Brothers Law. And I'm going to put the video in here. We're going to kind of go through the script. So Pot Brothers here.
What do you say when the cop first pulls you over?
Why'd you pull me over?
And when he keeps asking questions?
Not discussing my day.
And they ask more questions?
Am I being detained or am I free to go?
And if detained, what do you say?
I invoke the Fifth.
And then what do? You
shut the fuck up.
And, what they're basically saying is if you get pulled over, ask the police officer why they pulled you over. Some police officers will attempt to engage in conversation. Now, remember, this could be one of two different things. There are police officers that are talkative people. Police officers are human beings, at least so far. they haven't turned them into automatons quite yet. They will maybe ask you where you're going, what are you doing, what's going on. Just tell them you're not discussing your day. I'm not having a discussion about my day. Ask them if you are being detained or if you are free to go. If you are being detained, tell them that you are invoking your Fifth Amendment right to not answer questions without an attorney present. And then I don't know, guys, can you remind me what the last step is again in that process?
Shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up. Yes, shut the fuck up. Don't say anything. Now, again, you'll see a lot of the auditors where they don't exercise that right. They will keep talking, and it's sort of part of what they're doing. But you, as just a regular citizen, just trying to, maintain your cool, just be quiet. You don't have to answer any questions. You literally don't have to answer a single question from the police officers. If you've been pulled over for, a valid reason or what they think is a valid reason, then you do have to show your ID and you have to show your insurance and your registration. But you don't have to discuss where you're going, why you're going there, or anything else. And I think
Yeah,
that's
I mean, that's true, but God, it it makes me so hesitant to even say it, because I mean, we're 4 white guys, not really a problem, but to give that advice to us, I don't know.
Well,
I
I'll tell you what,
really
Brandon,
want to say, just do what it takes to survive, whatever that is.
it's a really good point. Let me sort of, so when I was in the Army, I worked in aviation, and you would have these checklists. So they're sort of if-then things. And this is a sort of more complicated end of this. So like, let's say if it's just a regular cop who's just, pulled you over because you were going, 75 and a 45 and you're kind of in trouble, then follow this the regular checklist, and probably everything's going to be okay. He's going to give you a ticket, whatever. If you realize that a cop is being incredibly hostile and is asking you for things and is clearly overstepping the bounds, you have to go to your then what do I do? Then do what you have to do to be safe. If he is asking for things that he shouldn't be asking for, or asking you things you shouldn't ask for, I would probably try to say once, I am invoking the fifth. If he threatens you, if you think the situation is going to get violent, do whatever he says, survive the encounter.
Yeah.
But I do think it is important to try and in some way, even in small way, try and get on the record. Because again, if he's got a body cam, those body cams get hidden, but they don't go away. I mean, that's what we found in a lot of these cases. They can't just delete the body cam footage. They can try to cover up, and they do all these other sort of little things around it. They don't really delete them, it seems. So try and get on the record what your belief is, but past that, survive the encounter. Do what you have to do. If somebody's,
occurs to me too, would it be a decent idea? I mean, I could see arguments not, but would it be a good idea to have those body cam footages just put out onto a live feed that anyone can access?
It's sort of outside the scope, because it's more of like a systemic thing. But yeah, I do think it would be interesting to have it where all police, and you get into some privacy issues with that, because obviously you don't want people just watching police cam footage. But to have all of it being uploaded to some kind of a server that can be easily accessed after a Freedom of Information Act request or something like that. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Yes, exactly. Who does watch The Watchmen?
So as Brandon said before, they are class traders, and he talked about the unfair power balance and how they can kind of intimidate you into giving them information that you legally don't have to give them. On top of that, I mean, you said they're human, so I thought about, what about their personal biases? They're going to judge you by, what class you look like, what race you are, what kind of vehicle you're driving, and then, we've had a rash of whatever this is going on in this neighborhood, and they start throwing accusations around because they don't know you.
Well, Kale, you brought up like 4 points that I have a lot of things to say about. And I think they're all really important. So the first part is, and I think this is something that puts us in a very strange position, because I think that we're all very, very pro-union. I am a union member myself. I am in favor. Everybody should join a union. Except for there's that weird one. And that weird one is the police union. Because every other union is out there to protect workers. And the police union seems like it basically exists to injure workers and protect power.
Yes.
I don't have any answers on that as far as like, what do we do? How does it work? I don't know. But I do know that police unions are fundamentally very different creatures from other unions. Because I'll tell you what, I haven't seen very many right-wing politicians come out to defend a plumbers union.
And it should be easy to fire a cop. Unlike any other union where it should be hard to get somebody fired, policemen are one of those things that should be fired at the drop of a hat for even flimsy excuses. I don't care.
And this is entirely anecdotal, but this is my experience. In most of the union functions that I've been to, I have not seen police unions standing shoulder to shoulder with the unions that I've been in. They are a very, very strange union. It is, and I support the right of police officers to have a union. I think everybody should have a union. But the way their union works is, I'm going to use a very technical term here, fucked up. And it is not great the way their union works.
And ironically, they were not only used back in the day for like the slave trade, where they originated from, but also into union busting after the fact. Making sure that the workers don't have some kind of unity. That was their job.
That's largely what got the Pinkertons their money, and it's the Pinkertons that kind of started, the core of the Secret Service.
So I would like to tie this back into the things you should do when you get pulled over, and knowing the right way to behave, etc., so you don't get in trouble, don't make cops nervous. And I just would like to say, whose fault is it that there are bad cops? It's not the person that gets pulled over that maybe is irritated, or I don't know, is not super respectful. Well, guess what? The cops don't have you're not legally required. I mean, I'm not giving you advice to be rude to the cops, don't get me wrong, but you're not required to be polite to them. And I feel like all the burden of that interaction continues to be put on, you shouldn't wear a hoodie, you should not curse, you should be politeful, you should say yes sir, yes ma'am, whatever you ask me to do, even if it violates my constitutional rights. When really, the group that is most responsible for whether there are good cops and bad cops are cops. I mean, this is their profession. If they aren't interested in making sure that there's only good cops out there, then what difference does it make if the rest of us want that?
Well, and I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, you guys on the left claim racism all the time. I mean, I don't know that I put it in there, but there is in 2006, the FBI investigated cops for being infiltrated by white supremacist groups.
So that was the other thing. That was the other thing that Kale brought up. Give me just 1 second, because I want to get back to that. I think it's really important. But Jim, when you were talking about the way people talk about how you deal with a police officer, having grown up in a small town, I've heard that advice about something else too. Be careful how you dress. Don't move in the wrong way. And that is a mean dog. That is a dog that has been beat too many times by its owner and has become mean, and will attack at the drop of a hat. And so the fact that we give the people the same advice for dealing with police as we do abused dogs that are dangerous really should be telling us something about policing in this country. That it's like, no, you can't, don't show any red color to the police because they might just come at you. And it's like, that's a bull. Like, bulls do that, not human beings with guns that are meant to protect us. But Kale, you had a thing that you linked, sort of talking about police officers and social media.
Mm-hmm.
And Brandon kind of brought that. I thought it's a really interesting thing that's happening.
Yeah, they are using it / abusing it, I think. They go on to social media sites like Facebook and whatever, and like sometimes they use it for investigative purposes. They'll pose as, youths trying to find predators and things like that. And then a lot of times it's just posting, I guess what would classify as propaganda. There's specifically one website called The Upbeat, and it's just basically nothing but feel-good stories for law enforcement.
I believe that's called propaganda.
Never engaging any kind of negativity at all, never, talking about any shootings or any kind of mishandlement of any cases. It's all just like, look, this guy did this and this lady did this and everything's happy hunky-dory.
Yeah.
Brandon, you were kind of talking about that too, so why don't you go ahead?
There's a podcast that I am just blanking on the name. Like, I can picture its artwork, but they talk a lot about that, what they call propaganda. It's not just how news stories present it, when they were say, an officer was involved in a shooting, you know, where all blame is just, you know, lost in the mistiness.
Like police say versus police claim.
Yeah. Well, but then it goes to, you know, even like all of the Dick Wolf shows, you know, like he's very much a
I
fan
like,
of
for some reason, I like the cadence of Dick Wolf.
Dick Wolf. But I mean, all of the
I think that's correct. That's the correct
Law
way
and
to say
Order
that.
ones. Law and Order are all, you know, oh, the cops are just doing their best and all that. And again, I mean, there's too many police officers for there to be no good people there. That's not what we're saying. We're saying the system itself is corrupt.
And I think that's a really good way to transition into talking less about sort of the local police, which we've sort of talked about these things local police too.
Well, there is one more thing you should bring up with local. It's not local to us, but it's local to our country, and that's the Brookside thing.
Well, no, that's actually what I was going to go to. So that goes from being a sort of, when I say local police, what I'm sort of talking about is individual police officers doing things that are shitty. And so I don't often say this, but John Oliver stole my headline just a week or two ago. Brookside, Alabama is a little town in Alabama where just all of a sudden one year, the money that they were collecting in traffic fines and other things went up 640%. Now, some places reported that as, oh, look, they're cleaning up the streets. Well, Brookside, Alabama has 1,250 some odd people there. They have, I think, 9 or 10 police SUVs. They have 2 Humvees. They have a SWAT team, and they have a tank. Because a town of 1,230 people definitely needs a tank more than it does a clinic. So what they were doing, the police chief has sort of quietly resigned towards the beginning of the year, and now there's sort of a lot more stuff going on. I'm linking, by the way, there's a whole, by the way, if you love having your heart broken, watch the town hall they did for these people, where it's sort of crazy because it's really diverse. Like there's white people, black people, there's like people just coming up and just saying, I was just like driving my car and they were threatening me and they were doing all this stuff. And so this is your sort of local level corruption. This is one police force that was essentially taken over by an incredibly corrupt asshole so that they could then essentially police, earn money for policing. And so Brandon, go ahead. Sorry, that's where I was going though.
You're going to the Brookside thing? Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So Charlie, in Brookside, Alabama, which is just this really tiny town right along this busy highway, I think it's 1,253 people.
I said that.
They had a police force of 1 up until they hired Chief Mike Jones. And they, for some reason, decided that they wanted this bigger police force. And they started buying like military vehicles. They have a tank. And
I just said that, Brandon.
Well, and they started, it was like speed traps and like license traps. Like they would get people. There's this whole video of people testifying before the city council and before their local congressman and congresswoman. And it's just this on and on and on where people are paying like anywhere from $1,700 to almost $2,000 in fines and court cases. And this one super shady, corrupt towing service that kept coming and taking all their cars. They said they collected in surplus value excess of $760,000 in this 1,250 person town. It's just crazy. And the people that come and testify before the city council, it just goes on and on and on. Every person of color, any class differences, it didn't matter to the cops. I guess that's one thing, but it didn't matter to the cops. It's just anybody and everybody they could harass, they just did. And mostly centered around poor people who really couldn't afford to pay, but couldn't afford to fight either.
Yeah, like I said, that the town hall was it's heartbreaking. But again, like you say, it is very sort of egalitarian because it's everybody. It's everybody in the town is getting screwed over by these cops.
Sorry,
And by the way,
I didn't
I just like to
catch
say,
everything.
since this isn't has to do with Brookside, Alabama, it has to do with Des Moines, Iowa, but fuck Croto. Anyway, Kale, go ahead.
Well, since you mentioned Baltimore already, and now we've talked about Brookside, I think the granddaddy of them all probably was the Rampart Crash Division in LA, right?
Well, hold on, Jim. Did you have anything else you wanted to say on the Brookside? Because I want to get to Rampart and I want to get to Baltimore too. But did you read up on that or?
No. I have a more local anecdote. I mean, it's not anywhere near Brookside.
Does it
but,
involve saying fuck Croto? Because I want to emphasize fuck Croto as much as I can.
It could. So I lived in Iowa City for a while, and this is way back in the early 90s, and there was an article in the paper talking about how many millions of dollars the city made on parking tickets. And it was an institution. They had the meters set up so that you couldn't go to an hour-long class without having to leave to plug the meters, and they would come by 5 minutes before a class came out. Ticket. And by the way, you can't graduate until you pay your parking tickets. Which how does that work? Like, the university doesn't have anything to do with the city. Why do I have to pay my parking tickets to graduate? So more specifically for me personally, I didn't want to pay for on-campus parking pass, so I parked on the street near a house of a friend of mine, and I only made it about 3 weeks into the semester, and my friend said, "You need to come get your car. There's a tow sticker on it." I'm like, "How is there a tow sticker on it? It's a on-street parking." Well, the city had come and put a no parking sign right in front of my car and slapped a tow sticker on it, because I assume someone in the neighborhood said, "There's this car. It's parked there. Obviously, it's not somebody that drives it every day. They're, ne'er-do-well. Get rid of this car." Like, it's just, so, I mean, it's a small thing. Like, my constitutional rights weren't really violated or anything, but
No, Jim, it's not a small
this is
thing.
what
Because
happens.
the same fucking thing happened to me.
It's extortion.
Literally the same thing. So the previous house that Vanessa and I lived in, which is, nobody knows, Des Moines, it's over by Merle High Mall. I would park my truck out by the side, literally in front of my house, my house, not somebody else, my house, the house that I bought and pay taxes on every year. And so, I lived there for, was it 3 years, I think. And they put up a no parking sign. Literally, it wasn't no parking. It was like, you can't park from here to corner. So I had to like move the truck, but there was just enough room to park it here. And it's just like, by the way, people in neighborhoods can be petty as shit. Don't be a petty shit in your neighborhood. Like, just treat your other people in your neighborhood. Don't call the police on anybody unless they're trying to stab you or something. Just never call the police. And eventually I went out to go, they put a tow tag on it, because in here in Des Moines, if a car has been parked for more than 24 hours, you can call the police and it has to be moved within 24 hours, they'll tow it. And guess what towing company is the one that comes to tow it? That's right.
Croto.
It's fucking Croto. Did I say fuck Croto? Because I meant to say that, but that's beside the point.
I will add, when I lived in Iowa City, I had to go get my car out of impound 3 times.
And it's like $150 or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot.
And so it's the police utilizing this person so they can extort you. It's horrible. It's fucking horrible. And so I one day went out. They had put, because the person called the police on my truck again, and that was just so happened to be the day that the starter motor had burned out, because it was a kind of crappy old truck, and I couldn't move it, so I had to sell it. I had to call like the people that come and like take your car and pay $100 or whatever. And so when I saw people grabbing the truck, I had to go out and I literally said, "Are you guys the white hats, the black hats?" And thankfully they were the white hats, and I got $100 instead of got my car towed. So yeah, that example hits very, very close to home, Jim. I very much empathize about that one.
That's funny, because I sold that car for $100 too.
There you go.
I can't
Go
believe
away.
and put a sign in front of your car. That's like sounds like something out of a movie or a cartoon. They're just like ting 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 ting.
Oh
There's a
no, they
sign
did.
there.
And I even put a cardboard sign in my windshield with an arrow pointing in my house saying, "This is my car. I live here. Please don't tow."
They don't care.
And then actually, I called one of the times I called the local. I don't remember who it was. It was the city council or something like that. And I was vociferous in my disappointment in their decisions as far as parking, and they called the police on me, and like a cop actually came to my house.
Wow.
And it just shows you how this is how police get weaponized. This is how police get weaponized against, because, well, it's a whole nother thing, but yeah, you have to be really careful. Kale, you mentioned the Rampart division. That's really, really important. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
All right.
This
Well,
is in Los Angeles.
yeah, in the Rampart division, I guess, is where a lot of this was first kind of came to light. There was an officer who swapped out flour for cocaine in the evidence room.
Kale, to be fair, it was Bisquick. It was Bisquick.
Oh, Bisquick, sorry. And just like, I guess the whole department was just corrupt. They were just keeping money and drugs and threatening people and just basically kind of forcing their will. They weren't cops, they were gangsters. They abused their power to the ultimate power and made themselves into this invincible gangster force until, well, they weren't completely invincible because they got busted.
But they didn't really. I mean, in the Rampart scandal, only 2 cops went to jail. I mean, there's all this corruption and all this stuff going on. And the history of the LA Police Department is let's just say rough. It's a rough history. But I mean, I remember living back in the 90s, and we were led to believe these crash units were just like these paladins marching into these valleys of evil to clear them out, and we should be. And meanwhile, they were getting rich off of everybody down there. And literally, it might be 3. It sticks in my mind. It was only 2 people that actually went to jail. They had I think maybe 5 or 10 that ended up retiring, and some that faced disciplinary actions or whatever, but it was very, very few that actually went to jail for committing crimes. I mean, committing just crimes. Like, how do you say that more clearly? It's like, that's a crime that you did. You did a crime, like blatantly.
You did the opposite thing of what you're supposed to do.
Right. You're supposed to do not crimes, but instead you did crimes.
So, Mike, can you please link to the Dave Chappelle skit about the 2 cops sprinkling cocaine dust in Dave Chappelle's house? I don't know.
I will find it, and it will be in here.
Oh my God. That nigger was on PCP, Johnson. I had to use necessary force. You saw him. No paperwork. Just sprinkle some crack on him. Let's get out of here.
It's like 60 seconds long. It is disturbing and one of the most hysterical things I've ever seen on Dave.
Unfortunately, given the way YouTube does things, it'll have to be probably less than 10 seconds.
Are you saying that some officers plant evidence?
So that's another thing that I was looking up. Are we all familiar with the term drop guns?
No.
Drop guns are they, and this is something that sounds like something from a noir, a detective novel, but this is a real thing. There are police that keep illegal guns, so that they can then drop them after they've shot somebody. Now, I was looking for a lot of the stuff on this. It's a little hard to look up because the internet is an imperfect place, but it is definitely a real thing of police officers, again, dropping guns to show that they, their shooting was legitimate. It happened in the Rampart division. They showed that that was one of the main things, I think, during the Rampart division. Or was that the Baltimore? No, it was Rampart. Baltimore was a different one.
Probably
Baltimore was a Freddie Gray thing.
Yeah, they had the pellet guns, right? The BB guns.
No, that's a different thing. No, they actually have they're illegal firearms with the serial numbers filed off, that they will keep in their cars or keep on their person, so that when they shoot somebody, they can take the gun and drop it over by the suspect.
So they're supposed to turn it in for evidence or whatever, but they keep it.
Yeah,
Right.
Brandon was talking about Baltimore. There was something about Baltimore where they kept. I did not really understand that, but they kept BB guns to place on people, so that they. could
Well,
say-
yeah, because it doesn't matter, because now anything that a cop sees is potentially you can shoot. Freddie Gray was the big thing in Baltimore, though, where they basically handcuffed him, put him in the back of a paddy wagon, and drove
Yeah,
over
like-
all these bumpy roads until he basically, was because you can't just sit with your hands behind your back in a van like that, because you're going to get hurt very badly, which they knew.
So is that actually what happened, or like, was that their explanation of what happened?
I don't know. Honestly, either way,
Like
it's just as bad.
Right. I mean, I was just, I feel like I don't remember exactly if anyone ever determined, like, did they beat the shit out of him? And then they said, oh, well, we just hit a bump. I guess he broke his neck.
I mean, again, I feel like there's not a one's worse than the other. Like whether they put him in there, in perfect health, and then specifically drove around until he was, beat nearly to death, or whether they beat him nearly to death and then put him in there. It's like, it's the same pretty much, I think. Brandon, what did you think about the Rampart stuff? Because that one really, the thing that killed me about that is they never really like closed it out. Like it was just, they were just kind of like, well, and there we're done.
Brandon.
Sorry, my dog started barking. I've been trying to mute it out. Yeah, well, the thing that sticks out to me isn't so much the corruption, I guess. It's that, just like you were saying, only 2 cops went to jail. In those times when the evidence is so strong and there's any kind of public outcry, they will always throw 1 or 2 under the bus. And I mean, that's what you see it, like the 2008 crash. There's like a handful of people that went to any kind of prosecution for that.
And yes, we're definitely doing an episode about that someday, because I
mean, it's
I did
just
so
one
much
of those
research
things.
on the time. It's insane.
They'll be able to point to it and say, see, we did something, we were responsive. Yeah, no. I mean,
Well, Brandon, probably the better example of that is the Abu Ghraib abuses, where you had a prison in Iraq that was being run by the CIA and the United States Army, and they said that a huge regime of torture was being run by 2 E4s. Well, I've been in the military longer than 5 fucking minutes, so I can tell you that's bullshit. 2 E4s aren't running shit in that place.
Who even buys that kind of, well, and it doesn't even have to be that good, because it's enough to assuage the conscience of like right wingers essentially, but the people that support them, they'll just be able to say, well, they stopped, or it's just these bad apples. Just these bad apples is a way of making yourself feel better for supporting something awful.
I feel like people don't carry out that metaphor. We keep saying bad apples, but what is the rest of that metaphor? A bad apple ruins the bunch. So if the bad apples have been here for the last 50 fucking years, then what does the bunch look like at this point?
Well, and along that same line, one of the things you linked was the Washington Post, where to date, as of October 7th, 1,039 people have been shot and killed by the police in the past year. And there'll be times when people will argue, well, they shoot more white people than black people. And it's like, motherfucker, that's still a bad thing. That's not a point on your side. That's still bad. Who cares what color it is? I mean, I'm not saying all lives matter. I'm not saying that, but police shoot people. That's the main point. I mean, they shoot black people more per capita, and that's awful. But cops shouldn't be killing people left and right anyway. They have a less dangerous job than lumberjacks, and lumberjacks aren't just shooting people in the face at random every morning. I mean, it's just nonsense excuse.
You've clearly never been to a lumberjack convention.
If I could jump in here real quick, that kind of segues into a comment I wanted to make about how law enforcement in general, from the evolution of law enforcement. It's linked below in the video there. The gal was talking about how modern law enforcement has become more and more detached from the public, which it claims to serve. They're dissociating from regular people. They're
Very much the
different
case.
than us.
They feel
And
like an occupying force in some, especially with all the military equipment.
one of the things that concerns me is fear, cop fear. I mean, you talk about these shootings and incidents like that. How many times is it because the cop says, "Oh, I felt like my life was threatened, or I felt like I was being threatened, and I was defending myself," and then somebody ended up dead.
I just want to say from again, I was in the military. I was not a rifleman. I was a REMF. You can go ahead and look that up. But the thing is, I did go off post a couple times. And the thing is, you can't just shoot people because, and remember, this is in the military, in a foreign country, when you're in the middle of a war. You can't just shoot somebody because you're afraid. You can't. You can shoot when shot at. You can shoot when shot at. Meanwhile, here in the United States, where we're at least supposedly not at war, police officers will say, he was resisting, I was afraid. And my response is, well, then maybe you shouldn't be a fucking coward. Maybe you should grow some goddamn courage when you get that job and have some patience and not be afraid. If you're afraid, maybe you're in the wrong goddamn job.
Every time somebody says that line, "No, I feared for my life," I always think of the South Park, "I gotta thin out the herd, or they're heading right for me." It's just a line somebody says before opening fire. It's like eat a hakimas in Japan before you start eating. It's just a thing you say.
So one of the things that sometimes strikes me when I watch, which I try not to, but watch the news, and the police are on the news. Any and all. Police are on the news, right? And people get shot by the police. But also you see these stories where there's a gunman and he's shooting at police and there's a standoff. And somehow we have the resources to send 50 cops to come capture this guy alive. But if there's a kid that has a hamburger and it looks like a gun, they get shot dead. That disconnect, there are situations where there's clearly someone that is a criminal and they are dangerous, and we go beyond in the effort to capture them alive. But everyday shit, people just get shot and we're like, well, the cop was afraid, so I guess they got shot. They had a screwdriver or a hamburger, or when I lived in Seattle, a guy got shot in his lazy boy because he had a remote control watching TV and looked like the gun, so dead.
Like I said, it's the one. I'm not going to ask anybody else to go to this place, but I will, because again, I'm a veteran. I've been to a country at war. Cops are fucking cowards. You're all cowards. Because you live in a country that is actually really, really safe. It is really safe here. People really don't shoot each other very much. We don't really rob each other all that much. There's been an uptick in crime recently, but it's not overwhelming or anything.
Especially not historically. I mean,
right,
compared to the 70s, it's super safe.
Yeah, the 70s were a fucking nightmare. The 70s, at least you might have an argument. But it's a very safe time, a very safe place. And all of this gets back to, I would say money, because they want to increase their budgets. They want to buy more things. It's our Brookside, Alabama, where you have a town of 1,250 people, where they have 2 Humvees and a tank and a SWAT team, and they probably don't have a high school. Well, I'll tell you what, high schools are much better for towns than police departments are.
Or tank.
Although tanks are fun, you do have to admit that they do seem like they'd be fun to drive around and just crush a car with or something.
I myself think the Des Moines Police Department needs an attack helicopter. Am I wrong?
Well, I'll tell you what, interestingly enough, one of the times when I went down to, because it wasn't my truck, it was my dad's truck that got towed from that location. Because again, they put these tow notices on, and then, several hours or 24 hours, whatever's later, they come and tow it. Which, when you park out in front of your house, you don't just go and look at your car every day, especially if you work from home. So if they have that on the 24 hours. Anyway, so we went down there, and all I remember is going down to the Des Moines Police Department. And by the way, I will say one good thing about the Des Moines Police Department before we're done. There was one guy down there that was a snarky asshole in the best way, and we'll talk about him in a second. But getting this thing out of Hawk, or out of the impound lot, and seeing all these Des Moines police officers standing there with their combat gear and their AR-15s, just these big ass shit-eating grins on their faces, and I just thought, what a bunch of pieces of shit. These people would be so much better off spent taking a class in mental health or anything else other than going out to the range and jerking each other off. And it's just, they disgust me, to be perfectly honest.
You're talking about that. I don't mean to derail whatever the next step in the conversation, but I am always
This
interested.
is a multi-track conversation. It can't be derailed.
Well, I'm always interested in the step down process. Like my ultimate goal would be abolition, like my goal is with so many things. But what would be a step down from our current levels in policing? What would be the step down do you think most people would support?
Well, Kale linked a couple of articles that I liked quite a bit, and it's basically talking about police and social work. Because, okay, what is something that police should be dealing with? Police should be dealing with a guy with a machete and, let's say, a hockey mask who's slaughtering teenagers at a summer camp. Okay, that's a police situation. You call police on that. But that's not a very common situation. It just isn't. The more common situation is you have a husband and wife that are yelling at each other because they're both on meth. That happens a lot. You have a guy whose kid, stole his radio out of his car, and the guy's pissed and the kid's pissed and all this stuff. Or you have somebody who is somebody who is experiencing schizophrenia, who is hearing voices, and thinks that his mother has, stolen something from him that she hasn't.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up specifically.
All of these situations are situations that cops shouldn't be in, and I guarantee you, I wish we'd had a cop on here. Next, if we do this again, we will bring a police officer on to talk about this, because actually, no one. But they don't even want to be there for that. Like, ask a police officer what his least favorite call is, and it is domestic dispute. Because domestic disputes are always the bad ones. That's where it's either somebody with mental health issues, it is a husband and wife yelling at each other, a father and son yelling at each other, two brothers yelling at each other, whatever it is. And what you need there is not a guy with a fucking AR-15. What you need there is somebody who's going to talk to these people, who's going to say, hey, what's going on? Talk to me. What are you guys so mad about? Because we've come around to this point where we think that, like, well, talking never solves anything. Anybody who's been to therapy will tell you talking actually solves a fucking lot. Talking can solve everything. And so if you have somebody there who understands that process, or if you have police, where let's say if you have a cop, you say, okay, if you go and get a psychology degree and keep this job, I'll pay you $25,000 a year more, or $30,000 a year more, so that you know what's going on. So when you come into that situation, you can speak intelligently and you can say, hey, and just stop. And the other thing on top of that is sorry, I'm filibustering, I apologize. And the other thing is the rush. Cops are always in such a rush we need to get this situation resolved now. It's like, no, you don't. Talk to that guy for 25 minutes. There was one where a guy chased this kid over to a car, and the kid locked himself in the car. And what did the cop do? He pulled out his baton and broke the car window and dragged the kid out of the car. It's like, would it have killed you to just talk to that kid for 10 minutes and ask him what's going on? What's happening? Tell me what's happening. But it's a rush. We have to get this done now. Anyway, I'm gonna let you guys talk for a minute because I talk way too much.
So I would like to touch on the mental health aspect of this, because it has impacted me personally. And I think I probably talked about this on another podcast. I don't remember which one, but I have had to choose whether to call a mental health crisis hotline for help several times. The police have come to my house at least twice that I remember. And each time I thought, there's a non-zero chance that I'm going to get the wrong cop and they're going to show up and bad stuff is going to happen, because I'm calling because there's a mental health crisis. So obviously things aren't going well if I feel like I have to call for help. And it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen most of the time, but it does happen. Police show up and they aren't trained, and the tools that they have are a gun and pepper spray and a baton. And those aren't tools that are helpful in a mental health crisis. And a lot of times people end up dead. And I have to tell you that it is a really, really, really hard decision to make, to say, I really need help. I am going to call for help, even though I know that there is a chance that somebody could end up hurt or dead because I'm calling for help, because the people I'm calling aren't trained to deal with this type of situation. And it happens all over the country every day.
I'm going to link the Veterans Crisis Line below too, because it's really, really important. They do a lot of really good things, but it's there was a guy that I work with who's also a veteran, and he had a lot of problems with his wife. His wife had left him and they were experiencing significant difficulties. And he was in his bedroom with 40 caliber. And thankfully, he called the Veterans Crisis Line, and also thankfully the sheriff who showed up was also a veteran and came in and talked to him. And so that situation worked itself out because there were people there that knew what they were doing and wanted to help. But unfortunately, as Jim's saying, which is 100% the case, that's not always the case. And it's scary as fuck, because if you have a family member that is dealing with serious mental health issues, it is a scary fucking thing to deal with. It is a really fucking scary thing to deal with, because you're dealing with somebody who is not themselves, somebody you've known all your life, who isn't acting the way they act, and you don't know how to deal with it. And what do you do? Because I mean, that would be like, imagine to sort of take the emotion out of it a little bit. Imagine your fucking water main breaks, and you're worried that if you call a plumber, the plumber's just going to hit you in the head with a fucking wrench.
Right.
And you're like, well, do I call the plumber or not? It's like, no, you should call the fucking plumber, and you shouldn't have to worry about whether the plumber is going to fucking do something terrible, because the plumber knows what he's doing and knows how to fix it.
A better analogy would be, instead of fixing the leak, he just beats the shit out of the pipe.
Well, sometimes the pipe's got it coming.
So I would like to add that the people that came and helped my family were very professional. They did a great job. But I also would like to add that it shouldn't be their job. Police officers shouldn't have to be the first responders for everything. It's
especially, there are people like, I remember watching a TikTok of like mental health nurses talking about the stuff they've had to go through. Some of them have been hit and scratched and assaulted, and they've never had to shoot anybody. They've calmed them down. They've given them either the med or the talking to or the attention they needed. They've done what they've had to do. There's people out there that are trained for it. So I mean, an entirely separate group of people who have the time to do that, I think is a fantastic idea. I think it'd be a great way to spend municipal money too.
There is evidence that using social workers does bring the crime rate down, and it improves relations with the general public. As evidence of that, there's link below. Mayor Tim Keller in Albuquerque, New Mexico, has been implementing social workers in his law enforcement force and has seen significant changes in public relations and crime rate.
And I would just say that,
Yeah.
like to say that social workers, some of the most unsung heroes in this country, that have done the most good for people while getting virtually no reward in return. Social workers are great. Definitely,
Well, and,
I prefer social workers to cops by a lot.
Gail, you were saying, how they seem to be part of the community. That used to at least be a thing with police too, before they started militarizing and carrying around combat gear and AR-15s. My uncle was a cop for a long time, and he's like, in his mid to late 70s at this point. So, I mean, way back then, he said, when I first started out, we used to walk the beat in our own neighborhood, and all I had was a 6-shooter. And probably, honestly, you probably shouldn't even have had that much. But, I mean, at least there, there's been corruption, straight through on the police force.
That's the picture that people want painted. They want this Andy Griffith police officer walking the beat, talking to the neighbors and everything. That's not what it is.
But Andy Griffith never shot anybody.
Right. But at least there, if you're at least from the community, people are going to see you in the off times. They're going to see you. They're going to be like, hey, Bill, didn't you shoot Fred the other day? What the fuck? I mean, there's a chance for shunning. There's a chance for recrimination.
Well,
but
like,
if you're out there and fighting here with a
for example, you guys were talking about.
Yeah, one second. Let me just real quickly. The movie that I can think of that sort of illustrates that's the best, and it's a movie that it's one of those few movies that I liked as a kid and now kind of rewatch and like a lot is Copland. And that's all what Copland is about. It's about these city cops that have found a way to redistrict so they can live off of the island in this, little area apart from everywhere, and live their corrupt little lives without ever having to worry about any accountability. And that is sort of policing writ large.
I think they also made a movie called Dark Blue that was kind of about that too.
Is that Kurt
So
Russell?
I would kind of like to get back to Andy Griffith and just say, probably some of our viewers think Andy Griffith, that's a nice fairy tale, 1950s, 60s TV show, complete fiction. But there are other places that do policing different. United Kingdom, a lot of the cops don't carry guns at all because guess what? There aren't guns everywhere. And so policing looks very different. And this is a constant frustration of mine. Everyone thinks this is the way it is. It has to stay this way. It doesn't. We make choices. And if we're going to choose to be a highly armed society, then we also have to grapple with what are the consequences of being a highly armed society. And if you're going to feel like you have to arm the police with tanks and AR-15s and body armor because we're highly armed, then maybe Brandon's right. If you have police that can't even turn on a body camera, then they should be fired because the stakes are really high. If you're arming everyone with tanks and AR-15s and body armor, then the standards have to be higher. And if you want low standards, then it has to look different.
We need to.
I think there was a comic book hero that had a motto that was something like that. It's like with great I can't remember what it was. It's something. It was really good though. What was it?
Great responsibility.
I think you got that back. No, I think
with great cocktails comes great responsibility.
I was just gonna say that.
Well, I know all about that.
I live in a town of about 3,000 people, and I think we have 5 cops.
That's a lot.
Maybe 6. I think it's 5. But I mean, I know who the chief is, and like I have, crossed paths with him before. I've spoken to him. Hey, how you doing? Whatever. That was it. And the rest of the cops, I don't know. I know nothing about. I don't talk to them. But I will say this, since you bring up the Copland thing, like they all live in like the new little developments. Like this town has had some residential development. And it's weird because I live in a town where without growth of a lot of businesses, there's a growth of a lot of houses because we live in a place where you get a house and then you go work in the city. but like all the cops, they all live in these new little additions on the edges of town where all the nicer houses are and everything. So even then they're like detaching themselves, even in a small town.
Well, and you know, we recently had somebody challenge one of the books that is on the most banned books list here in my town. They wanted to ban the book The Hate You Give, which has a cop shooting somebody for no particular reason. And they tried to get the resource officer there to testify about how it being bad for cops, but the chief of police here was actually left of center, you know, probably not leftist like us, but you know, not a and he said, no, the book is fine. He goes, this kind of thing does happen. You just have to see the news to know this kind of thing happens. And he completely went against banning the book. Again, we're not saying that every single person that joins the cop is a bad person. Not every there's probably some people like Hot Fuzz where the people legitimately believe that enforcing the law would be a net good for your population. But I mean, it's I don't think that's as common as it really should be.
And there's a link to the Amber Ruffin show down below, talking about police in schools as well. And
That was a really good video. She's good. I like watching her stuff. It's interesting. She was talking about resource officers. Resource officers aren't necessarily bad, but she sort of talks about them on the more aggregate scale. I think we've been talking about this for a while. There's no way we've done this justice. There's just too much. There's just too much and too many things to talk about. Policing has become such a central kind of part of our country. And it's, you know, it's based on fear and based on, you know, protection of property of the wealthy and all these other things, that it's just it's a bit of a mess. I'm just going to be honest. It's a bit of a mess. But I think that's sort of, I think we've covered what we intended to cover right now. I think next time we're going to come, we're sort of doing a little bit of a few episodes on criminal justice. And I think next time we're going to come back and talk about the criminal justice system, the courts, and sentencing. And then I think we're going to do a video about prisons after that, which is going to be a super fun, happy, upbeat episode, I'm sure, because prisons in this country.
That one is definitely going to get dark, I think.
There's I'm not even going to say it because it's too dark, but prisons in this country are it's reprehensible what we do in prisons in this country.
Animal
but, Kale, I'm going to start off with you. Why don't you give some of your final thoughts, what we talked about? Real quick, actually, before we finish up, just real quickly. So I kind of wanted to finish on the systemic level, and just want to briefly mention when you talk about policing on the more national level, just two quick things. The idea of disparities in law enforcement stops. Proportionally, more Black people and Latino people are stopped than white people in this country. It's just a fact. There is systemic racism. We'll talk about systemic racism in criminal justice later on, because that's huge too. But I'm talking just at the police level, at the systemic police level. There's disparities, and then the biggest one is marijuana. Black people and white people smoke marijuana at virtually the same rates. White people actually slightly higher, and yet Black people are arrested at significantly higher rates than white people.
4 times.
Well, and there's the cocaine and crack thing too.
Yeah, the crack thing's a whole nother thing. Crack is cocaine, and yet cocaine, people arrested for possession of cocaine were given lower sentences than people arrested for crack, even though it's the same drug.
Yep.
And I remember the 90s. I remember the 90s. Cocaine was the worst thing that ever happened, and cocaine was like, oh, that's fine. But stockbrokers do cocaine, and poor people do crack.
Right.
So go figure. Kale, what are some of your final thoughts on what we talked about today?
I think everything that we've talked about has just shown that the roots of this system that we call law enforcement here in the US, they're based in slavery, based in racism and classism. And that continues to flourish beneath the surface in the system. It's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do. And so that's why we need a new system. And do you blame the system or do you blame the cop was a question I was asking myself. But I think the cop becomes part of the system. They're no longer an individual once you become that thing. Like the Leviathan or whatever. No, and I do have a personal experience with some things that were unpleasant with law enforcement. One specifically thing that I did want to say was I have had a gun.
You froze up, man.
Shoot you in the face.
Can you say that again?
Kale, say that one more time. You cut out literally at the beginning of telling your incredibly important Toad.
I said that, okay, so I was driving in my car. I came up to a stop sign. I was wearing my seatbelt. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't doing anything illegal. And I was stopped by an officer who, during the conversation, said the words, "I will shoot you in the face," and unbuckled his holster and put his hand on his weapon.
Sounds very salty.
A big shiny gun. And here's the kicker. This guy knew me. I had been dealing with this guy since I was a teenager. And at this point I was in my early 20s, very early 20s. And so he knew who I was, and I don't know why he was reacting the way he was. I'm not going to go any further detail of that story. There was another embarrassing occurrence in West Des Moines, which is kind of a upscale part of town. And I was driving a not upscale car and was targeted. I felt targeted. And even if I was targeted, I couldn't prove that I was targeted. It's very hard to prove that. But I was handcuffed and searched, and my car was searched, and it was all very embarrassing experience for a cracked taillight. And nothing came of it, and I was let go except for the fact that I was embarrassed in public by two officers who wanted to exert their power over me because of what they thought I was, in front of 30 strangers. So, and I don't think that I deserve that.
But Kale, we all know cracked taillight is a gateway crime to, selling heroin. So they were just doing their due diligence because you could be.
I must have had pounds and pounds of heroin and dead babies in my car.
It's the only possible explanation for that cracked taillight. Brandon, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think we could keep going in depth about this topic and probably find example after example. I've seen one website that just lists the names of unarmed Black people that have been shot by cops, and it just goes on and on and on. It's heartbreaking to even see the scroll go by. But I think the thing that we could spend more time on in some future episode is, like, it's a political third rail to even say defund the police anymore. Even our local leftist, a Democrat, are running away from it. Like our Cindy Axne, she's like, well, I'll never defund the police. And it's like, that's not courting any of your leftists at all. But the thing is,
For the record, I confronted Cindy Axne personally last month.
really?
Yes.
Well,
Personally.
it's just one of those things. Like, what I think a very interesting conversation along this lines would be, what do you think would be the acceptable first step back? I mean, I remember, they played footage of Joe Biden in like the 90s saying about how he was going to be tough on crime, and this whole tough on crime, I have a big strong, tough guy type of thing
That's-
is another problem. You know, we can't get any politician that says, no, I'm not gonna add more cops. I'm not gonna be tough on crime. I'm not gonna vote for mandatory sentencing. You know, a lot of, I mean, this leads to the prison, and especially the prison for profit type of thing, but it also leads to more cops. Bill Clinton put, what was it, like 9,000 more cops into the US system. It's just, who needs this? What is the first thing we can start scaling back on?
By the
But
way, I feel like if we want
okay.
to make up with some of the crazy people on the right, we don't like Bill Clinton either. Like, we're no fans of Bill Clinton. We don't like him. It's fine. So if you hate Bill Clinton, go ahead and hate him. It's fine.
Or most of the rest of the Democrat establishment. Some guy at work was like, but Nancy Pelosi, I'm like, fuck, who cares what Nancy Pelosi said? What's that got to do with anything?
I can't stand her. I feel like Jim was sneezing for emphasis while you were talking.
He was
Like,
good emphasis there.
Yep.
all right, Jim, some final thoughts.
A couple, and they're a little maybe off field, but I would just like encourage anyone that's listening to open your heart when you hear people talk about their experience, and realize that your life experience might be different than someone else's life experience. I took it was a social justice course. It was religiously based, and we had guests come who are ethnic minorities, and they talked about their experience in our town with the police. And there was a large portion of the people in the class who were all white, older people, who were like, I just don't think the cops in Windsor Heights are pulling black people over more than they pull white people over.
Can I just real quickly, fucking Windsor Heights.
Right.
Not a fun place. Not a fun.
Yeah.
Fucking Windsor Heights.
So it does happen, and you need to listen to your fellow man about their experiences. Just because your experiences have been different doesn't mean that, you know, your experience is the same as everyone's experience.
You know, it occurs to me, Jim, that's got to be rare. Like just being in the same building while people describe their experiences with a thing you don't think is happening. It's got to be a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, given something we talked about now, there, again, we link below the town hall of the people in Brookside, Alabama. And it's just these people standing up and talking about their experiences with the Brookside PD. And like I said, it's heartbreaking. I mean, these people were abused and exploited. And yeah, you don't hear people talking about, like, just like it's sort of like, and people that watch this channel a lot of times will say maybe I'm hypocritical when I say this, but you were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should always be listening twice as much as you're talking. And yes, I see the irony of that.
In fairness, Mike, I will say you listen to a lot of stuff in preparation for each episode, so the listeners can't see it, but you are listening a lot. The other point I wanted to make really doesn't have anything specifically to do with criminal justice, but it got back to something you said earlier about social workers talking through a problem, trying to talk to give people more time, to kick the can down the road. And I would just like to say there's too often in our culture, we want to solve the problem. We want to solve it. We want to solve it now. So we're the cop that bashes the window in and grabs the kid out of the car, because what's talking going to do? And I would just like to encourage everyone to think about how many problems that they are forced to deal with, that if you kick the can down the road, and then you kick the can down the road, and then you kick the can down the road, you kick the can down the road several times, isn't that solving the problem? Like, not every problem can be fixed. Some problems just have to be dealt with. And especially when we're dealing with mental health, sometimes that means just making it a little bit better for a little while, which means kicking it down the road. And that is solving the problem in some cases. And that's something that I feel like as a culture, we really have a hard time wrapping our head around.
I think that's right.
I feel like Jim made too many good points and I have to now make better points, but I'm not going to. No, he's right about all that. It's I mean, again, my friend, you know, the sheriff that came in and talked to him, and the person on the Veterans Crisis Line that talked to him and that actually worked with him, they didn't solve all his problems that night. But they made sure he didn't end things that night. And so sometimes you do need time. I mean, time is just like, we all have time. We can spend time on people. If you're a cop and somebody is experiencing a problem, you know, say, hey, sit down here on the curb, talk to me for a minute. Tell me what's going on. What's going on in your life? Like, what's going on with your wife? What's going on with your kids? What's the deal? Because so many things could be solved, not even solved. You know, I'm falling in the same trap. Not solved. They could be alleviated or at least helped. One of the things that I noticed, so I had been out without healthcare for a while, and I went to the doctor, and I told the doctor all the problems that the various little, I mean, not any big health problems, little health problems that I was having. And I felt better just being able to talk to a doctor about the problems that I was having, about saying, hey, I'm having, you know, a little bit of back pain. I'm having this, I'm having this, I'm having this. And so, yeah, just the power of conversation and the power of having somebody say, of just look at you like a person and talk to you. And so that wasn't what I intended to say, because Jim went and made a bunch of good points, like a loser.
I think of something though, because we talked about that, how it's harder for men to talk about their problems and stuff because the toxic masculinity that's been fed into their brains. And think about it, policing, don't you think that guy that you were talking about that's standing there strapped to the teeth with his AR-15 and his body armor and everything, don't you think he feels incredibly masculine right there? So why does he need to tell anybody anything? He doesn't have problems. And so that's how he sees like the rest of the world. And that's why he chooses to shoot first instead of talk.
Well, actually, Kel, that leads into what I was going to talk about, which is fear. I mean, fear and mental health. Those are the two biggest problems with policing, I think, in this country, is the fact that we have been trained over and over and over again in this country to be afraid of our fellow citizen and to be afraid of our fellow human. You know, if you're an American, be afraid of Mexicans and Russians. If you're an Iowan, be afraid of, well, right. If you're an Iowan, be afraid of Missourians. If you're a, you know, if you're a white Des Moiner, be afraid of or if you're a West Des Moiner, be afraid of Des Moiners. It's all about, the whole system is set up around feeling fear towards people rather than compassion. And compassion is better than fear because nobody compassioned somebody to death. But a whole lot of people feared people to death.
Killed him with kindness.
Yeah, well, you kill the shit out of them with kindness. They don't actually die. They didn't die. They just didn't.
And when people say travel, this is part of it. Seeing other people and realizing that whether it's the next state or the next country over, people are very much the same. They want the same thing. A lot of it's just to be treated with dignity and respect.
And the final thing, and Jim talked about this before, I actually wasn't really intending on bringing this up originally, and I don't know why. It's kind of an oversight of mine, but is mental health and the idea that, you know, I've had a lot of experience that in my life, whether personally or with friends or, you know, colleagues or whatever. Think to yourself, if somebody was having an extreme mental health episode, how comfortable would you feel calling the police? Because that is a very personal and a very deep and a very important question. Because if somebody in your life is experiencing a significant mental health, you know, issue, whether that's schizophrenia or panic or whatever it is, if you feel like you are afraid to call the police, then that basically tells you everything you need to know about policing in this country. And all the other statistics don't matter. None of the statistics matter. If you are afraid to call the police, that's all you need to know, that policing is experiencing a significant crisis in this country. Oh, by the way, I will close on one funny thing. The snarky asshole cop at the Des Moines PD who I talked to go get my truck, when I told him that Crow Toe had it, and he said something to the effect of, "Oh God, it's those assholes. I hate them. They cause us so many calls." Because like Crow Toe causes so many people to call the Des Moines PD angrily that he just fucking hates Crow Toe. So I would like to like that cop for saying that. And also, I'm not sure I mentioned this before, but fuck Crow Toe. I had to end on a less emotional note because I have toxic masculinity and I'm afraid of emotions.
I thought you had intoxicated masculinity.
I can have both. That's
Fair
possible.
enough.
All right. So I think we've covered this as much as we can. Again, we haven't covered everything by 1/100th of a millimeter compared to what's out there. But I hope that, you know, you listen to this and get something out of it, because I think we all take this very seriously, and this is a very personal issue for all of us. And it's very tough. And I just want to thank you for watching. And please like, share, and subscribe. Have a good drink and have a good day. And also, shut the fuck up.
Tased and punched, Bronkel Brown yelled, "I'm not doing nothing." This body camera footage revealing his cries for mercy did nothing to block more blows from Officer Drew Rao's fist.
I believe in our police. I'm not anti-police. I'm just anti-bad cops. He's a bad cop. He needs to be fired immediately.